a sound as familiar to them as the rhythm of their daily labor. Yet, beneath the surface of that earth, something monumental stirred, something ancient, powerful, and unforgettable. As their tools scraped against the hardened earth, they unearthed what could only be described as a divine relic, a stone carved with exquisite precision that pulsed with a story long forgotten by time. It was a disc, larger than anything they had ever seen, its surface etched with intricate patterns and figures. But it wasn't just any stone. It was the image of a woman, decapitated and surrounded by snakes, skulls, and a crown of feathers. A goddess who had once been revered by the Aztec people, but whose story had been buried beneath centuries of history. The goddess was Coyolcohorc, Yiuisai, the Aztec moon goddess, her image forever locked in the heart of the stone. As the workers stood frozen, their eyes wide in disbelief, they could feel it, the weight of history pressing upon them. This wasn't just a discovery. This was the pulse of an ancient civilization calling out from the depths, demanding to be heard once again. The stone was not the only secret waiting to be revealed. The workers' discovery set off a wave of archaeological fever. Experts from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History rushed to the site, halting all construction, and soon, the excavation began. As they dug deeper, the true scope of the find became apparent. The stone disc had been placed at the base of an enormous stairway, which led to the ruins of a pyramid. And this was no ordinary pyramid, it was the heart of an ancient city, one that had once ruled the land with unrivaled might. The city's name was Tenochtitlan. It was here, on this very spot, that the Aztec Empire had risen. Its foundations steeped in the blood of sacrifice, its streets lined with the echoes of gods and warriors. Tenochtitlan had once been the crown jewel of the Aztec world, a city that was not just a place of commerce or civilization, but a living, breathing testament to the will of its people, its rulers, and the gods they worshipped. The discovery of Tenochtitlan's ruins beneath modern-day Mexico City was not merely a glimpse into the past. It was a window into a world where life and death were intertwined in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. Imagine, for a moment, standing in the heart of Tenochtitlan. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the sound of drums. The streets are alive with the bustle of traders and priests, warriors and nobles, all moving in harmony as they prepare for a ritual, a sacrifice to the gods. Towering pyramids rise from the earth, their jagged edges carved with the faces of gods whose names are now lost to time. The sun beats down on the stone, casting long shadows that stretch across the city like the fingers of fate. In the distance, you hear the call of a priest as he leads a group of captives up the steps of the great temple, where they will offer their blood in exchange for the power to sustain the sun itself. Tenochtitlan was a city that lived on the edge of life and death, where every stone, every building, every act of devotion was a prayer to the gods. It was a city built on blood, blood spilled in the name of war, in the name of the sun, in the name of survival. And yet, as magnificent as it was, Tenochtitlan's rise was marked by an insatiable hunger. Hunger for power, hunger for dominance, hunger for eternity. The Mexica, as they called themselves, arrived in the Valley of Mexico as nomadic wanderers, a people cast adrift by fate. They had come from the deserts of the north, driven by a vision that would shape their future. The prophecy told them that they would find a new home where an eagle perched upon a cactus, its talons clutching a snake. And so they wandered, searching for that sign, their eyes fixed on the horizon, their hearts filled with hope and ambition. And when they found it, when they saw the eagle perched upon a cactus in the middle of Lake Texcoco, Tenochtitlan was born. But this was no ordinary city. This was a city built on divine will, a city that would bend the very earth to its desires. The Mexica were not content to merely survive. They sought to conquer, to control, to rule. They were a people driven by destiny, and their vision for Tenochtitlan was nothing short of epic. In the heart of the city, towering pyramids rose like monuments to the gods. The great temple, the center of religious and political life, stood as a symbol of the Mexica's power and devotion. Its steps, slick with the blood of sacrifice, were climbed daily by priests who chanted the names of the gods in a language as ancient as the stars. It was here, at the top of the pyramid, that the most sacred rituals took place. Here, the Mexica offered up the hearts of their captives, warriors from distant lands, slaves taken in battle, and even those who dared to defy the will of the emperor. These sacrifices were not just rituals. They were the lifeblood of the Mexica's empire. In their eyes, the sun itself depended on these offerings. The blood of their enemies, spilled upon the stone, was the fuel that kept the world in motion. Without sacrifice, the sun would not rise. Without blood, the gods would grow weak, and the world would fall into darkness. And so, the Mexica gave, and they gave, and they gave, until the earth itself seemed to drink from the well of their devotion. But as the city grew, so did its ambitions. The Mexica forged alliances with neighboring cities, formed the Triple Alliance with Texcoco and Tlacopan, and began their campaign of conquest. They swept through the Valley of Mexico, taking land, capturing prisoners, and expanding their influence. The city's wealth grew with each victory, and Tenochtitlan became the undisputed center of the Aztec Empire. Yet for all its power, Tenochtitlan was not invincible. Beneath its grandeur lay a tension that could not be ignored. The people they had conquered, the cities they had subjugated, were restless. The sacrifices that had once bound the empire together began to tear at the fabric of Mexica society. As the empire expanded, so too did the number of enemies who sought to destroy it. And then came the inevitable change. The world that had once bent to the shape of Tenochtitlan's imagination would soon be upended by forces the Aztecs could not have foreseen. The arrival of the Spanish, with their foreign gods and deadly weapons, would mark the end of the Aztec Empire. The gods of the Mexica would fade, replaced by the cross of Christianity, and the blood that had once flowed in the name of Huitzilopochtli would be silenced forever. But even in the face of such overwhelming change, Tenochtitlan's story is far from over. It lives on in the ruins that still lie beneath the streets of Mexico City, in the blood-stained stones of its temples, in the images of gods and warriors that have been preserved in the pages of history. The empire may have fallen, but the legacy of Tenochtitlan, the city that dared to bend the world to its will, remains a testament to the power of human ambition, to the beauty and terror of a civilization that sought to reshape the very fabric of the cosmos. In the silence of the modern world, where only the ghosts of ancient ruins remain, we are left to ponder. How did the Mexica, with all their ingenuity, their vision, their power, come to an end? Was it their ambition that led to their downfall? Or was it the forces of fate, the collision of two worlds that sealed their fate? The blood of the Aztecs still runs beneath the streets of Mexico City. The pyramids may have crumbled, the temples may have fallen, but their story lives on. In the ruins, in the artifacts, in the very soil itself, Tenochtitlan remains. It is a city that defied the passage of time, a city that burned brightly in the annals of history and yet was swallowed whole by the waves of change. The Aztecs may have fallen, but their story, their legacy, is eternal. And so, As we stand on the precipice of the past, looking back at the rise and fall of the Aztec Empire, we are reminded of a simple truth. Civilizations rise, they burn, and they fall. But their stories, woven into the fabric of the earth, inscribed upon the stones of time, remain forever etched in the collective memory of humanity. Welcome to Empires Historical, where the echoes of the past still speak to us, where the blood of the Aztecs still runs through the veins of history. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us and keep the stories of lost empires alive. Your subscription means we can keep bringing you the tales that shaped our world. Now let us continue the journey through the rise and fall of the Aztec Empire, a civilization that changed the course of history, leaving a legacy that, even today, can still be felt beneath the streets of Mexico City. Stay tuned as we explore how this mighty empire, born of sacrifice and ambition, was brought to its knees by forces beyond its control. On the banks of Lake Texcoco, where the waters once lapped against the shore beneath the shadow of ancient volcanoes, there rose a city that dared to become the very heart of the world. It was not just a settlement, nor just a collection of stone and clay. Tenochtitlan was a manifestation of divine will, a city carved out of the earth with the very ambition of gods. This was not a city born of mere survival. This was a place that existed to challenge the universe itself, to shape the course of history with its will, its warriors, and its gods. As the Mexica, whom we now call the Aztecs, arrived in the valley, they were not merely wandering tribesmen. They were bearers of prophecy, chosen by the gods to carve their name into the bones of the earth. The city they envisioned was nothing less than the foundation of their dominion over the world, a city that would rise like a colossal pyramid, crowned with the blood of warriors and sacrifices, sustained by the lifeblood of its people, and watched over by the gods themselves. The Mexica's journey into the Valley of Mexico had not been easy. They had wandered for generations, moving from place to place, always seeking, always searching. Their journey was not one of mere survival, but of destiny, a path leading them to this very spot where the waters of Lake Texcoco whispered of their future. The sign had come in a vision, an eagle perched upon a cactus, its talons clutching a serpent. This was the omen they had been waiting for. It was here, amidst the mud and reeds, that they would build their city. In the beginning, it was a humble island, a place that would have seemed insignificant to any other people. The land was marshy, uninviting, and difficult to work. Yet it was here, amidst the desolation, that they saw their destiny unfold. The Mexica built their city from nothing, carving out artificial islands, creating chinampas or floating gardens in the very heart of the lake. These gardens, teeming with maize, beans, squash, and chilies, would become the backbone of Tenochtitlan's prosperity. Yet in their eyes, these islands were not just tools for survival. They were symbols of their power to create order from chaos, to conquer the land and transform it into a divine reflection of their ambition. Tenochtitlan was not simply a city, it was a manifestation of the will of the gods. From the moment the Mexica set foot on this land, they began to build a world that bent to the shape of their imagination. The Great Temple, or Templo Mayor, stood as the pinnacle of their architectural and spiritual vision. It was not just a place of worship, it was the axis mundi, the center of the world, where the heavens met the earth and the gods themselves were summoned through the act of sacrifice. The steps of the Great Temple were bathed in the blood of countless victims, their hearts torn from their chests and burned on the altar, offered to the gods to ensure that the sun would rise again. The sacrifices were not just rituals, they were the heartbeat of the Aztec Empire, the blood of warriors, the blood of captives, the blood of the earth itself. This was the energy that sustained the gods and, in turn, sustained the empire. The Mexica understood that the world could not survive without the constant flow of blood. From the blood of warriors came the power to conquer. From the blood of captives came the power to sustain the divine forces that governed the cosmos. And from the blood of their own people came the power to ensure their own immortality. Tenochtitlan was a city like no other. Its streets were lined with the whispers of the gods, the cries of sacrifice, and the thrum of power. The Mexica built their empire on the foundation of fear and awe, for they believed that the gods could only be appeased through bloodshed. And in the center of it all stood the rulers, the Tlatoani, who were not simply kings, but embodiments of divine power, the chosen representatives of the gods on earth. Their word was law, their will was supreme, and their power was absolute. The Tlatoani were more than just rulers. They were intermediaries between the divine and the mortal. They had the authority to govern the land, but their reign was legitimized through divine sanction, secured by rituals of sacrifice and offerings. They were the ultimate symbol of the Mexica belief that power, in its truest form, came from the gods and could only be preserved through their constant favor. But as the city grew, so too did its ambition. Tenochtitlan's reach extended far beyond the shores of Lake Texcoco, into the neighboring city-states and beyond. The Mexica formed alliances with Texcoco and Tlacopan, creating what would later be known as the Triple Alliance, a powerful force that dominated the Valley of Mexico. Their conquests were swift, brutal, and effective. With each victory, they expanded their empire, enslaving the conquered peoples and forcing them to pay tribute, while their warriors captured prisoners to be sacrificed on the steps of the great temple. And yet, for all its power, Tenochtitlan was fragile. Its very foundation, built upon blood and fear, was destined to crumble. The Mexica's conquests had created a vast empire, but they had also sown the seeds of rebellion. The people they had conquered began to resent their oppressors. The blood that had once flowed freely to sustain the gods now began to turn against the Mexica, as enemies rallied and alliances shifted. Beneath the grandeur of the pyramids, beneath the eternal gaze of the gods, the cracks in the empire began to form. The empire was built on a dangerous dichotomy. The gods had given them everything, but they had demanded everything in return. The blood of warriors, the lives of captives, the very essence of the Mexica people. It was this offering that secured the Mexica's place at the center of the world. And yet, the same blood that had elevated them now began to poison the heart of the empire. As the empire expanded, so too did the pressure to feed the gods with more and more blood. Sacrifice had become not just a duty, but an insatiable need. Tenochtitlan's greatest strength was its ability to bend the world to its will. The Mexica believed that they were the chosen people, divinely ordained to rule the world. But their very belief in their destiny would become their downfall. They had made enemies of too many, captured too many, sacrificed too many. The weight of their ambition, their thirst for power, would eventually crush them. When the Spanish arrived on the shores of Mexico in 1519, they were met with the full force of the Mexica Empire, but they were also met with the arrogance of a civilization that had long since stopped fearing death. The Mexica had grown so accustomed to their own power that they believed the gods were on their side, that their will, their sacrifices, would ensure victory. But the Spanish were not like any enemy the Mexica had ever faced. They were armed with weapons the Mexica had never seen, guns, cannons, and steel, tools that could break through the walls of Tenochtitlan and tear down the gods themselves. The Mexica rulers, blinded by their faith in their own destiny, failed to recognize the true threat. They welcomed the Spanish with open arms, seeing them as possible allies, as a force that could aid in their ongoing struggle for dominance. The arrival of Hernán Cortés and his men would be the beginning of the end for Tenochtitlan. The gods, it seemed, had turned their backs on the Mexica. In their desperation to maintain their power, they had failed to see the seeds of their own destruction. The blood that had once sustained the empire now began to spill in vain. The fall of Tenochtitlan was swift and brutal. In a matter of months, the once mighty empire was reduced to rubble. The pyramids were destroyed, the temples were desecrated, and the blood of the Mexica was spilled upon the very stones they had once worshipped. The gods they had served so faithfully turned silent, and the city that had once been the heart of the world was swallowed by the earth. The Mexica, in all their glory and in all their hubris, were gone. And yet, even in their fall, Tenochtitlan's legacy remains. The ruins of the city still lie beneath the streets of Mexico City, a silent testament to the ambition, the power, and the sacrifices that shaped the fate of a civilization. The rise and fall of Tenochtitlan, from its creation out of nothing to its violent end, stands as a monument to the heights and depths of human ambition. The gods of the Mexica may have faded, but the echoes of their empire linger in the collective memory of humanity. The rise and fall of Tenochtitlan is a story of ambition, of sacrifice, and of the fragility of even the greatest empires. What happened to the Mexica is a reminder to us all that no empire is eternal. The very forces that built the Mexica's grandeur, their ambition, their blood, their sacrifices, were the same forces that tore them apart. The sun may rise and set upon the ruins of Tenochtitlan, but the lessons of its fall are as eternal as the stones that once formed its foundation. In the end, the Mexica were not the masters of their destiny. They were the servants of it. And in that service, they built an empire that will never be forgotten. The blood of their warriors, the sacrifices to their gods, and the grandeur of Tenochtitlan live on, etched into the very fabric of history. And as we look back on this epic tale, we are reminded of the fragile nature of power, of the cost of ambition, and of the eternal cycle of rise and fall that defines all civilizations. The rise and fall of Tenochtitlan serves as a sobering reminder of the fragile nature of power, the inevitable consequences of unchecked ambition, and the weight of sacrifice that often defines the fate of empires. The Mexica, in their pursuit of greatness, crafted a civilization that, while magnificent in its achievements, ultimately crumbled under the weight of its own hubris. The gods may have demanded their blood, but in the end, it was their relentless thirst for domination that brought them to ruin. Tenochtitlan's legacy is immortalized not just in its grand structures and the grandeur of its rulers, but in the lessons it offers us today. The echo of the Mexica's ambition resonates in the chronicles of history, reminding us that every empire, no matter how powerful, is subject to the whims of fate. Tenochtitlan, a city built from nothing but vision and sacrifice, lives on in the collective consciousness of mankind as a symbol of both human greatness and fragility. Through the ashes of Tenochtitlan, we are left to ponder the true cost of power, the price of sacrifice, and the tragic yet awe-inspiring journey of a civilization that rose to unimaginable heights, only to fall, like the sun, into the depths of history. The Mexica, who would eventually come to be known as the Aztecs, did not merely see themselves as a people or an empire. They believed they were the central force in the cosmos, chosen by the gods to hold dominion over the earth. When they laid their eyes on the Valley of Mexico, they didn't see just an empty expanse awaiting settlement. No, to them, this was a divine land, a canvas upon which their civilization would paint its legacy. a canvas designed by the gods themselves. The Mexica envisioned their capital, Tenochtitlan, not merely as a city, but as the center of the universe, the place where heaven and earth converged, where the gods would look down upon their creation and smile. From the moment they arrived in the valley, the Mexica believed that their existence was written in the stars, that they were destined to rule, not just by right, but by divine mandate. Every aspect of their society, from their intricate architecture to their fierce militarism, was steeped in this belief. Their city, their empire, their entire existence was built upon this sacred connection between the mortal and divine. To the Mexica, everything they did was an offering to the gods, a way of maintaining cosmic balance. And at the very heart of this belief was the idea that the gods could only be appeased through blood. Tenochtitlan, rising from the waters of Lake Texcoco, was a marvel of human ingenuity and religious devotion. Floating gardens, canals, pyramids, and temples, every inch of the city was designed with one purpose in mind: to honor the gods and to ensure that the Mexica would remain under their divine protection. The Mexica believed that their city was not just a political center, but a sacred space, a direct manifestation of their belief that they were the chosen people, and the world itself had been created for them. Tenochtitlan was built with such grandeur because to the Mexica, it was more than a city. It was the very center of the universe, the nexus where the divine would meet the earthly. But as with all things that rise too swiftly, the Aztec Empire was fragile in its own brilliance. The very strength that propelled them to conquer and build so magnificently also became their undoing. The Mexica believed that in order to maintain divine favor, they had to continue making offerings, sacrifices that would sustain the gods, and by extension, their civilization. Their belief was simple yet profound. The gods required blood to maintain the balance of the universe, and in return for this sacrifice, the Mexica would receive the gods' favor, ensuring the continuation of their empire. This was not just a religious practice, it was the foundation of Mexica power. However, what began as a system of faith and devotion became a never-ending cycle of conquest and bloodshed. As the Mexica expanded their empire, they conquered more cities, bringing more tribute, more captives, and more souls to be sacrificed. The act of bloodletting, once a necessary ritual to please the gods, became the driving force behind their relentless expansion. They were no longer just a people trying to survive. They were an empire that existed to feed its gods and grow its power. They were driven by an insatiable need to continue this cycle, to maintain their status as the chosen people. The Mexica's sacrifices, however, were not merely symbolic. They were real, tangible acts of violence. The great temple of Tenochtitlan was the epicenter of this bloodshed, where the hearts of the sacrificed were offered to the gods. It was a brutal, bloody practice, but it was also a deeply sacred one. The Mexica believed that in offering their captives' lives, they ensured the stability of the cosmos. Yet, as the demand for sacrifice grew, so did the resentment among those who were subjected to Mexica rule. The empire that had been built on devotion to the gods was now an empire built on fear and oppression. The Mexica were brilliant in their approach to warfare. They did not seek to annihilate their enemies outright. Instead, they waged wars for the purpose of capturing prisoners to be sacrificed. This was how they justified their constant expansion, through the belief that they were carrying out the will of the gods. But as the empire grew, so did the pressure on the Mexica people to continue this relentless cycle of war and sacrifice. The land they had conquered was vast, and the number of enemies and captives to appease the gods seemed endless. It was this unsustainable expansion that began to strain the fabric of Mexican society. The demands for tribute and sacrifice were no longer just a religious duty. They had become a matter of survival. The Mexica had built an empire so powerful that it had come to depend entirely on the flow of blood to sustain it. The conquered peoples resented the empire's demands. They longed for freedom, for relief from the endless tribute, and for an end to the bloodshed that had become their daily reality. The Mexica's greatest strength, their unyielding devotion to their gods, had become their greatest weakness. As the Mexica expanded their territory, they grew more vulnerable. Their reliance on conquest and sacrifice created fractures within their empire. Despite the Mexica's belief in their divine right, they began to lose control. They had made too many enemies, forced too many peoples into subjugation. The Mexica's empire, once held together by the fear and reverence of their gods, was beginning to unravel. Their ambition to please the gods had taken them to the heights of power, but now it was pushing them toward the precipice of collapse. And then, in 1519, the Spaniards arrived. The Mexica, in their arrogance and belief in their divine invincibility, welcomed the foreign invaders as potential allies, as emissaries from the gods. They saw their arrival as another sign of divine favor, as an opportunity to extend their influence even further. Little did they know that the gods had abandoned them. The Spaniards, armed with steel, guns, and horses, forces the Mexica had never seen, had come not as guests, but as conquerors. The Mexica, blinded by their belief in their own divinity and their reliance on sacrificial power, had failed to recognize the true threat the Spanish posed. The Mexica, confident in their power and divine protection, underestimated their enemies. They welcomed the Spanish into Tenochtitlan, unaware that their very hospitality would seal their fate. The Spanish, aided by indigenous groups who resented Mexica rule, quickly made their move. The Mexica were caught off guard. In less than 2 years, their once mighty empire would be shattered. The fall of Tenochtitlan was swift and brutal. The city that had once been a shining beacon of Mexica power was reduced to rubble. The great temple, the sacred center of Mexica faith, was destroyed. The blood that had once flowed freely in the service of the gods was now wasted, as the empire that had once seemed invincible was brought to its knees. The Mexica's belief in their divine right to rule, their faith in the gods who had once protected them, could not save them from the fate that had been written long ago. The gods they had worshipped were silent, and the empire they had built with their own blood and sacrifices crumbled before them. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked not just the end of the Mexica Empire, but the end of a worldview that had defined their civilization. The Mexica had believed themselves to be the chosen ones, destined to rule the earth. But in the end, they were just like every other empire, prone to hubris, pride, and the fatal flaw of overextension. The very belief that had made them great was the same belief that led to their downfall. The gods they had served so faithfully had turned away, and the Mexica were left to face their fate. Yet, as we look back on the fall of Tenochtitlan, we must remember that the story of the Mexica is not just a story of their collapse. It is a story that echoes through time, a story of ambition, sacrifice, and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. The Mexica were a people who reached for the heavens, who believed that their destiny was written in the stars. But even the gods could not save them from the forces of time and history. Tenochtitlan, now buried beneath the streets of Mexico City, is a silent monument to the ambition and tragedy of the Mexica people. The blood that once flowed through its streets, the sacrifices that were made, the wars fought, all of it is gone, reduced to dust. And yet, the legacy of the Mexica remains. Their civilization, their story, their rise and fall still echo through the ages. The Mexica believed they were the chosen ones, but their story is one that speaks to all civilizations, that no matter how powerful, no matter how divine the ambition, all things must eventually fall. In the end, the Mexica's empire, like all empires, was a brief flicker in the grand sweep of history. It rose to greatness, but it also fell, consumed by its own ambition, driven to the edge by its own hunger for power and divine favor. The gods, who had once been their protectors, were now silent witnesses to their demise. And as the Mexica's empire fell, so too did their belief in their own immortality. They had believed themselves invincible, but in the end, they were like all empires, fleeting, fragile, and subject to the inexorable march of time. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not just the end of a city, it was the end of an entire worldview. The Mexica had believed that they were divinely chosen to rule the world, and their civilization had flourished under this belief. But in the face of the Spanish invasion, their divine mandate was exposed as a fragile illusion. The gods, it seemed, had abandoned them when they needed them most. The Mexica were not prepared for the invaders who came with fire and iron. The Spanish, with their horses, guns, and steel, were like nothing the Mexica had ever faced. Hernán Cortés, who led this foreign conquest, became the catalyst for the fall of a civilization that had once seemed invincible. The Mexica, blinded by their belief in their divine right to rule, made a fatal miscalculation. They saw the Spaniards as emissaries from the gods, unaware that these foreign invaders had no intentions of merely visiting. The Mexica were too late in realizing the true threat. Their once mighty empire, stretched thin from constant expansion, internal division, and the unrelenting demand for blood, could not withstand the onslaught of a foreign enemy. Their fall, however, was not solely the result of external conquest. The Mexica's reliance on sacrifice, warfare, and fear to maintain control had sown the seeds of their own destruction. Their empire, once built on a foundation of divine purpose, was brought down by the very cycle they had created, one of endless conquest, tribute, and bloodshed. The gods they had served with such fervor did not save them. Instead, it was their inability to adapt to the new world that spelled their doom. The Mexica's empire crumbled, not just because of foreign invaders, but because they failed to recognize the changing tides around them. The belief that their gods would protect them proved to be as fleeting as the empire itself. The fall of Tenochtitlan was the tragic end of a great civilization that had risen from the ashes of the past, but in the end, it too became a shadow of history, buried beneath the weight of its own ambitions. As the Mexica expanded their empire, they were not merely growing in size, they were expanding their very conception of the world itself. Every step they took, every victory they claimed, was a declaration of their divine mission. The Mexica did not see their conquest as mere territorial gain, nor were they driven by the hunger for wealth alone. They were driven by a deep, metaphysical belief that their empire was not only destined to rule the world, but to protect the universe itself. Each victory, each sacrifice, each piece of tribute brought them closer to fulfilling a sacred mandate, to sustain the very order of creation. This was a cosmic duty, one that transcended the mundane affairs of kings and warriors, of politics and land. The empire, and indeed the entire Mexica worldview, was built upon the idea that they were the center of the universe, the axis upon which the world turned. And within this vision, the act of conquest was not just an expansion of territory, it was a reaffirmation of the divine order. Every battle fought, every city conquered, was a step toward securing the cosmic balance, a way to honor the gods who, they believed, had chosen them to maintain the world. Bloodshed was not merely an act of war, it was a religious obligation, a necessary ritual to ensure the survival of the universe itself. But like all civilizations built on a foundation of power and divine favor, the Aztec Empire had a fragile underside. The very expansion that had solidified their dominance in the region also sowed the seeds of their undoing. As the Mexica expanded, they faced the ever-growing strain of maintaining control over their vast territories. The demands of their gods, requiring constant blood offerings and tribute, became increasingly unsustainable. With each new city brought under their rule, the Mexica were forced to extract more and more from the conquered peoples. They demanded blood, resources, and loyalty. Yet, over time, this growing pressure began to erode the empire's once unified structure. As much as the Mexica believed they were the chosen people, they were not immune to the forces of rebellion and resentment. The empire they had built upon fear and awe became one of deep oppression. The very people they had conquered, once subdued by the sword and the god's will, began to question their role in this grand design. The Mexica's reliance on terror and sacrifice to maintain control may have seemed effective in the short term, but it created a simmering discontent that could not be ignored. Beneath the surface of Mexican society, there were cracks that were beginning to widen, cracks that were invisible to the rulers, but clear to those who were subjected to their relentless rule. The Mexica had built a city that was the envy of the ancient world, Tenochtitlan, a city of breathtaking beauty and divine purpose. It rose from the waters of Lake Texcoco, an architectural marvel that seemed to defy nature itself. Pyramids soared to the sky, temples to the gods adorned every corner, and canals wound through the city like veins, bringing life to the heart of this magnificent empire. Tenochtitlan was not just a city, it was the embodiment of Mexica belief. The city was designed to reflect the universe itself, with each element placed carefully to maintain balance and honor the gods. Every street, every temple, every monument was a reminder of their divine connection to the cosmos. But behind the grandeur of Tenochtitlan, behind the glittering temples and the vast marketplaces, there was a darker truth. The Mexica's empire, for all its beauty and power, was built on a foundation of sacrifice, fear, and relentless expansion. The very structure that held their world together, religion, warfare, tribute, was a double-edged sword. It ensured their survival, yes, but it also alienated those they ruled, creating a powder keg that was ready to explode. The Mexica believed that their dominance was eternal, that their divine favor would never fade. Yet, history is cruel to those who believe their rule is unassailable. The cracks in the empire's foundation grew wider. Despite the Mexica's religious fervor and military might, their growing arrogance blinded them to the changing tides around them. They had made enemies, and those enemies, once submissive, were now plotting against them. While the Mexica focused their efforts on further conquests, they failed to see the alliance forming among their adversaries. The resentment among the conquered peoples, those who were forced into submission and made to serve the Mexica's ever-growing hunger for tribute and sacrifice, had been simmering for years. The Mexica's power had stretched too thin, and the tension was beginning to build to a breaking point. And then, in 1519, it happened. The arrival of the Spaniards. Hernán Cortés and his men, armed with steel and fire, came from across the ocean, bringing with them the promise of a new world. The Mexica, steeped in their belief that they were the chosen ones, saw the Spaniards not as invaders, but as emissaries of the gods. They believed that the arrival of the Spanish was a sign that their reign would be solidified, that their divine mandate would be reaffirmed. They welcomed them with open arms, believing that the gods had sent them to aid in the Mexica's expansion. Little did they know, the gods had already abandoned them. The very belief that had made them invincible now blinded them to the reality of their situation. The Spanish, with their horses, their guns, and their alliances with the native peoples who had suffered under Mexica rule, did not come to join the Mexica's divine cause. They came to conquer. At first, the Mexica were confident. They had conquered much of Mesoamerica. They had fought battles, made alliances, and built a powerful empire. Surely, they thought, the gods would protect them. The gods had never failed them before. But the Mexica underestimated the power of the Spanish. And more importantly, they underestimated the vulnerability of their own empire. The very foundation that had allowed them to rise, the endless cycle of bloodshed, conquest, and sacrifice, had created fractures within their own society. The Mexica had made too many enemies, and those enemies, once weak and subjugated, had become their greatest threat. The Mexica had believed that they were invincible, but they were wrong. Their hubris, their faith in their divine protection, led them to underestimate the Spanish threat. They welcomed the invaders with open arms, only to see their world unravel in a matter of months. Tenochtitlan, the jewel of the Mexica Empire, fell within 2 years. The great temple was destroyed. The city that had once been a shining beacon of Mexica power was now a heap of rubble. The empire that had once seemed unassailable crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. As the Spanish soldiers stormed through the city, they did not just conquer the Mexica, they shattered their belief in their divine right to rule. The Mexica's downfall was not just the result of military defeat. It was the collapse of a worldview, the collapse of a society built on the belief that they were chosen by the gods. The Mexica had given everything to the gods: blood, tribute, sacrifice. But in the end, it was not the gods who saved them. It was not the gods who gave them victory. It was the Spanish who came with their own gods and their own weapons, and with them, they brought an end to the Mexica's reign. The fall of Tenochtitlan is a sobering reminder of the fragility of empires, of the ways in which power, no matter how great, can be undone by arrogance and overreach. The Mexica believed they were the center of the world, but in the end, their empire was just another fleeting chapter in the long, unbroken story of history's rise and fall. The blood they had shed in the name of their gods, the sacrifices they had made to maintain their dominance, were ultimately meaningless in the face of a new world order. The Mexica's gods were silent, their empire was no more, and their once glorious city lay in ruins beneath the weight of time and conquest. Tenochtitlan, buried beneath the streets of Mexico City, serves as a silent testament to the rise and fall of the Mexica Empire. Their story is one of ambition, divine belief, and ultimate collapse. The Mexica believed they were the chosen ones, destined to rule forever. But in the end, they were like all empires, fleeting, fragile, and subject to the inevitable forces of history. Their gods had not protected them, and their empire, built on blood and conquest, crumbled beneath the weight of its own ambition. The Mexica's legacy is not just one of great achievement, but also one of tragic hubris, a reminder that no empire is eternal, and no belief, no matter how powerful, can withstand the march of time. The downfall of Tenochtitlan was not just a singular event, but a slow collapse that had been brewing long before the Spanish arrived. The Mexica had built their empire upon a foundation of blood and sacrifice, convinced that their divine mandate could never falter. Yet, the very thing that had elevated them to greatness became the force that led to their destruction. The Mexica's devotion to their gods was absolute, but they failed to recognize the fragility of their existence. The gods they had revered, the blood they had shed, and the sacrifices they had made, these were not the guarantees they believed them to be. As the empire expanded, so too did the number of enemies the Mexica had to subdue. The very subjects they had conquered began to grow weary of their oppressive rule, and resentment began to fester in the hearts of the people they had once controlled through fear. In their attempts to expand, the Mexica had inadvertently created fractures within their own empire. The empire, once united under the banner of their divine mission, became divided, with each conquered people longing for the chance to break free from the yoke of Mexica oppression. What's more, the Mexica's ambition to conquer new lands was always tempered by a cycle of war and sacrifice. They did not simply conquer, they conquered with the intent of securing tribute, sacrifices, and prisoners for their gods. Their relentless drive to please the gods became a vicious cycle, one that would stretch their resources too thin. They had built an empire that was incredibly strong, but it was also incredibly fragile, existing on the razor's edge of instability. The sacrifices, which had once been a sacred act of devotion, had become an insatiable demand that could never be fully satisfied. It was in this moment of overextension that the Mexica found themselves vulnerable to external forces. The arrival of the Spanish was not just the coming of a foreign enemy. It was the collision of two worlds, each with its own beliefs, its own gods, and its own fate. The Mexica believed that their divine protection was invincible, that their gods would continue to safeguard their empire. Yet, in their arrogance, they failed to see that the world was changing, that new forces had emerged that would alter the course of history. When Cortés and his army landed on the shores of Mexico, they were not just invaders, they were harbingers of a new age. The Mexica, in their pride, welcomed them as gods, as emissaries sent from the heavens to aid them in their conquest. But these men were not emissaries, they were conquerors. And the Mexica, in their misguided belief that they were the center of the universe, miscalculated the threat they posed. In the end, Tenochtitlan fell not because the Mexica lacked power or strength, but because they had become blinded by their own greatness. Their belief that they were the chosen people, destined to rule the world, was their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. The gods they had served with unwavering devotion had not saved them. Instead, they had been left to face their destiny alone. The Mexica's empire, built on sacrifice and divine favor, was no more. And with it, the world they had once ruled, the world they had believed was theirs by divine right, crumbled into dust. The fall of Tenochtitlan is a tragic reminder of the fragility of empires and the dangers of unchecked ambition. The Mexica, for all their greatness, were not immune to the forces of history. The gods they had worshipped, the power they had built, and the sacrifices they had made could not protect them from the inevitable tide of time. And in the end, like all empires, the Mexica were consumed by the very ambition that had once made them great. Tenochtitlan, now a memory buried beneath the streets of Mexico City, stands as a monument to their rise, their fall, and the tragic impermanence of even the greatest of civilizations. The Mexica, in their hubris, had created an empire so grand, so formidable, that it seemed to stretch beyond the physical boundaries of the earth itself. To the Mexica, their empire was not just a political entity, it was the embodiment of divine order. They believed they had been chosen by the gods to reign over the world, to preserve cosmic balance, and to carry out the sacred duty of maintaining the harmony between the heavens and the earth. But the very grandeur of their ambition would sow the seeds of their destruction. The Mexica's greatest strength, this unshakable belief in their divine purpose, was also their greatest flaw. It was in the heart of their empire, within the awe-inspiring city of Tenochtitlan, that their grandeur and their fragility were most evident. rising from the waters of Lake Texcoco, Tenochtitlan was a marvel of human ingenuity, a city that seemed to be designed to embody the divine. Every stone, every temple, every canal was a reflection of the Mexica's belief in their connection to the gods. The city was not just a place where people lived. It was the center of the universe, the axis upon which the cosmos turned. For the Mexica, Tenochtitlan was not merely a city. It was the physical manifestation of their divine mandate to rule. But this belief, though powerful, carried with it an inherent tension. For in the Mexica's eyes, the world could only be maintained through the spilling of blood. It was through sacrifice, through the offering of human lives, that the gods would be appeased and the world would continue to turn. Blood was the fuel that kept the universe in motion, and the Mexica's empire was built upon a cycle of conquest, tribute, and sacrifice. But in their pursuit of divine favor, the Mexica had created an empire that was not only unsustainable, but fragile. Their ambition was boundless, but so too was the cost of their greatness. In their conquest of Mesoamerica, the Mexica had gained immense power. Their military prowess, their belief in the divine right to rule, and their ability to exact tribute from the peoples they conquered allowed them to expand at a rapid rate. Yet, the empire they built was a pyramid, its foundation steeped in fear, violence, and bloodshed. The further the Mexica stretched their dominion, the greater the toll it took on the very people who were supposed to maintain the empire's stability. The conquered peoples, who had once been forced into submission, began to chafe under the weight of Mexica rule. They began to resist, and in doing so, they began to undermine the empire from within. This growing unrest was a silent force, building beneath the surface, unnoticed by the rulers of the Mexica. The people they had conquered, people who had once been crushed underfoot, began to rise. They had learned to survive under the yoke of Mexica rule, and now they sought to break free from the empire's grasp. The Mexica's unrelenting demand for tribute, their incessant need for sacrifice, began to breed resentment among the very people who had once been the lifeblood of their empire. What was once a cycle of devotion had become a cycle of oppression and fear. The Mexica, blinded by their own divine certainty, failed to see the cracks forming in their empire, and by the time they realized the threat, it was too late. In the years leading up to the arrival of the Spanish in 1519, the Mexica's empire was stretched thin. The constant wars, the demand for tribute, the unyielding requirement for sacrifice had begun to wear down the Mexica's ability to govern. The people of Tenochtitlan, once proud and loyal to their gods, now found themselves increasingly alienated from their rulers. The Mexica's ambition to conquer and expand had turned their society into a machine that devoured the very people who had once sustained it. What had once been a sacred obligation, a duty to the gods, had become a relentless demand that no longer served its divine purpose. The Mexica's reliance on conquest, on tribute, on sacrifice, had left them vulnerable. Their empire was built on a foundation of fear and devotion, but it was crumbling beneath the weight of its own ambition. When the Spanish arrived, it was not with the force of an army that the Mexica were defeated. It was with the power of misunderstanding. Cortés and his men, with their steel and fire, arrived not as emissaries of the gods, but as invaders who sought to upend the very order that the Mexica had built. The Mexica, in their arrogance, mistook the Spanish for gods themselves. They believed that these foreign men, who came with strange weapons and terrifying beasts, were sent by the gods to test them. They welcomed the Spanish into their city, believing that their arrival was a sign of divine favor. But in this crucial moment, the Mexica failed to see the true nature of the threat before them. They had built their empire on a foundation of blood, but the blood they shed would not be enough to protect them from the Spanish conquest. The fall of Tenochtitlan was swift and brutal. The city that had once been the center of the Mexica world was reduced to rubble in a matter of months. The Great Temple, the heart of their religious and political power, was destroyed. The Mexica, who had once believed themselves invincible, now found themselves at the mercy of the very people they had once viewed as mere visitors. The gods they had worshipped, the blood they had shed, the sacrifices they had made, none of it was enough to save them. The Mexica had built their empire on the belief that they were the chosen people, destined to rule forever. But in the end, they were just another empire in the long line of civilizations that had risen and fallen. As Tenochtitlan fell, so too did the Mexica's belief in their divine right to rule. The Spanish conquest marked the end of an era, the end of a worldview that had defined the Mexica for centuries. Their empire, once a symbol of power and divine favor, now lay in ruins. The Mexica, who had once believed that they were the center of the world, now found themselves at the mercy of forces they could not understand. The gods they had served so faithfully had turned away, and the empire they had built with their own blood and sacrifices was destroyed. Yet, the fall of the Mexica is not just a tale of conquest. It is a story that echoes through time, a story of ambition, of belief, and of the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. The Mexica were a people who reached for the heavens, who believed that their destiny was written in the stars. They built an empire that spanned vast distances, an empire that seemed destined to last forever. But in the end, their ambition, their belief in their own invincibility, was their downfall. They had built an empire of blood and sacrifice, but in the end, it was their reliance on these very things that led to their demise. The Mexica believed that they were chosen by the gods to rule the world, but the gods were silent in their time of need. The Mexica's story is a reminder that no empire is eternal, no belief is invincible, and no civilization is immune to the forces of history. The Mexica, for all their greatness, were consumed by their own ambition, and their empire, built on the bones of their enemies and their own people, crumbled before the tides of time. The story of the Mexica is not just a story of their rise and fall, it is a reflection of the eternal struggle between ambition and humility, between power and wisdom, between belief and reality. The Mexica believed that they were the chosen people, but they were not immune to the flaws that plague all empires. The gods they worshipped, the sacrifices they made, the wars they fought, they could not protect them from the inevitable march of time. And in the end, as Tenochtitlan lay in ruins, the Mexica's legacy was not one of divine favor, but one of tragic hubris. The ruins of Tenochtitlan, buried beneath the streets of Mexico City, are a silent testament to the ambition and the tragedy of the Mexica people. Their empire, once the most powerful in Mesoamerica, has been reduced to dust, but their story lives on. The Mexica were a people who believed that they were destined to rule, but in the end, they were like all empires, fleeting, fragile, and subject to the forces of history. Their story is one of rise and fall, of divine belief and human frailty, a story that reminds us all that no matter how great the ambition, no matter how powerful the gods, all empires must eventually fall. But the fall of the Mexica was not just the end of a dynasty. It was the unraveling of an entire worldview, a worldview so deeply ingrained in their being that it seemed inseparable from their identity. The Mexica had built their society on a foundation of divine certainty, convinced that their empire was the fulfillment of a cosmic destiny. It was a world where the heavens dictated the actions of men, where every battle, every sacrifice, every offering was a thread in the tapestry of the divine order. Their gods were both their protectors and their judges, and in this belief, the Mexica found purpose and power. Yet in the wake of the Spanish conquest, this belief was shattered. The Mexica's downfall was not just the result of military defeat, but the collapse of everything they had believed to be true. The gods they had trusted in, the rituals they had followed, had failed them when they needed them most. The Spanish invaders, armed with steel, gunpowder, and horses, technologies that the Mexica could never have imagined, had come like a storm, sweeping away the foundations of Mexica civilization. The very sacrifices that the Mexica believed had sustained them were now a haunting reminder of their vulnerability, their hubris. The Mexica were consumed by their own ambition, trapped by their belief that they could never fall, that their empire was invincible. But in the end, no empire can sustain itself forever. The gods, once so vibrant and powerful, faded into the background, leaving the Mexica to face the reality of their fragility. The sacrifices, the bloodletting, the endless wars, they had been a reflection of the Mexica's desperation to maintain their place in the cosmos. But as the Spanish forces descended upon Tenochtitlan, the bloodshed ceased, and the gods who had once held dominion over them fell silent. In the silence that followed the destruction of Tenochtitlan, the Mexica were left to confront the truth that had eluded them for so long. That the world they had built, the empire they had worshipped, was no different from the fleeting empires that came before them. Their story, once filled with divine purpose, now lay in ruins, scattered across the centuries. The Mexica had risen, they had conquered, and they had fallen, just as all empires do. The ruins of Tenochtitlan, now hidden beneath the streets of modern-day Mexico City, stand as a silent testament to the Mexica's rise and fall, their grandeur and their vulnerability. Their story is one that reminds us all of the fleeting nature of power, the fragility of belief, and the inevitability of change. The Mexica, for all their brilliance, were not immune to the forces of history. And in the end, their empire was consumed by the very ambition that had once made them great. The Mexica, like all civilizations, lived in the grand shadow of time. They, like the rivers that flowed beneath the mountains, believed their course was set, their destiny forged by the gods. Tenochtitlan was more than a city. It was an embodiment of a divine mandate, a place where the earth met the heavens, where every stone and temple was an offering, a testament to the belief that their empire had been chosen to rule over the world. They did not see themselves as mere mortals, but as the vessel of divine will, carrying the weight of the gods upon their shoulders. Their eyes gazed outward, not in fear, but in awe, as if the horizon was merely the beginning of a story written by the heavens. To the Mexica, the earth was not simply a stage for human endeavor. It was a sacred arena where the gods danced, their will manifest in every action, every war, every sacrifice. The Mexica were the stewards of this divine order, destined to uphold the balance of the universe by spilling the blood of their enemies, and sometimes even their own. Blood was the currency in which the Mexica paid for the gods' favor. In their cosmology, life itself was a gift bestowed by the divine, and thus it could be returned, offered back in a ritual of cosmic reciprocity. It was the blood of warriors, the blood of the conquered, the blood of the brave that kept the world turning. But what happens when this delicate balance falters? What happens when a civilization so steeped in its own sense of divinity begins to stretch beyond its limits? The Mexica believed that their power came from their adherence to the divine order, sacrifice, conquest, and tribute. But their insatiable drive to expand their empire, to bring more tribute, to collect more blood, began to unravel the very fabric of their society. What had been a sacred duty became a relentless cycle, one that fed off the very people who once had sustained it. The Mexica's empire grew at an astounding pace, but so too did the demands upon it. The Mexica's belief in their divine right to rule was rooted in their understanding of themselves as the chosen people, selected by the gods to carry out a sacred duty. Their gods, represented by gods of war and sacrifice, gave them strength, and in turn, the Mexica believed they could command the heavens through their devotion and offerings. Tenochtitlan, the great capital, was not merely a center of power, but a physical representation of the divine order they had come to believe in. It was as if the city itself was a thread woven through the tapestry of the universe, a divine creation that stood above all other cities, an eternal monument to Mexica ingenuity and faith. And yet, for all its magnificence, Tenochtitlan was a city built upon blood. Every stone, every temple, every canal had been paid for by sacrifice. Captives taken in battle, innocent lives offered at the foot of the pyramid. The Mexica's relationship with blood was not one of cruelty or mere violence. It was a relationship rooted in the belief that the gods would remain present in their lives, that they would sustain them, as long as they honored the gods with their devotion. But blood, as they learned too late, is not something that can be infinitely poured out without consequence. As the Mexica Empire expanded, so too did the demands for tribute and sacrifice. Cities fell before their armies, nations were absorbed into the Mexica fold, each brought into the ritual of worship and tribute. With every new conquest, the Mexica grew in power. But as they expanded, they also became more vulnerable. The empire, once a force of divine creation, began to strain beneath the weight of its own excess. The gods, once pleased with the offerings of the Mexica, began to grow silent. The sacrifices, once acts of devotion, became demands, a relentless tide of blood that had to be fed. The very forces that had made the Mexica so powerful began to erode their society. It was as if the blood that flowed from the hearts of the sacrificed had become a flood, washing over the Mexica and pulling them into a relentless current of conquest and expansion. As their empire reached further and further, the Mexica began to realize that their divinity could no longer sustain them. The gods they had once believed were with them now seemed distant, as if their favor had been withdrawn. But the Mexica refused to see the truth. They believed that they had been chosen to rule, and so they continued, unyielding in their pursuit of power, expanding their empire to the furthest corners of the land. They could not see the cracks that were beginning to form, the forces of rebellion stirring beneath the surface. The blood of their sacrifices had stained the earth, but it could no longer provide the divine favor they once enjoyed. It was in the midst of this growing unrest that the Spanish arrived. To the Mexica, the foreigners were a curious sight. They were unlike any enemies they had ever faced, armed with steel, carrying strange beasts and weapons they had never seen. The Mexica, in their arrogance, welcomed the Spanish as potential allies, as emissaries from the gods. In their minds, they were the chosen people, and the arrival of these strange men must have been a sign from the heavens, another test, another opportunity to extend their divine reign. The Spanish, however, were not emissaries of the gods. They were conquerors, driven by their own ambition, their own thirst for wealth and power. They saw the Mexica as nothing more than an obstacle in their path. What the Mexica could not see in their moment of triumph was that their gods had turned away, that their belief in their invincibility had blinded them to the true threat that lay before them. The Mexica, in their pride, failed to recognize the danger the Spanish posed. They welcomed them into their city, offering gifts and hospitality, believing that the gods themselves had sent these foreign invaders as a sign of divine favor. But in their blind devotion to their own beliefs, the Mexica did not realize that they were walking directly into the hands of their enemies. The Spanish, aided by indigenous groups who resented Mexica rule, quickly moved to take control. In less than 2 years, the Aztec Empire, which had seemed unbreakable, was shattered. Tenochtitlan, once a city of marble and gold, fell to the ground, its grandeur reduced to rubble. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not just the end of an empire, it was the death of a worldview, a death of belief. The Mexica, who had once believed themselves to be the center of the universe, now found themselves crushed beneath the weight of their own hubris. Their empire, built on sacrifice and divine favor, had fallen, and with it, their belief that they were invincible. The gods, who had once smiled upon them, were now silent, and the Mexica, in their final moments, were left to face the harsh reality that no empire, no matter how great, no matter how divine its origin, can endure forever. But in the ashes of Tenochtitlan, the Mexica's legacy endured. Their belief in the sacred nature of their empire, their devotion to their gods, their ambition to rule the world, these things may have led to their downfall, but they also left an indelible mark on history. The Mexica were a people who believed they were destined for greatness, who reached for the heavens and grasped at immortality. But in the end, even the greatest of empires must fall, and the gods, once so present in their lives, fade into silence. The Mexica's rise and fall is a reminder that no matter how powerful, no matter how divine the ambition, all things, empire, belief, and even gods, are subject to the inexorable passage of time. As we stand in the modern world, looking back at the ruins of Tenochtitlan, we must remember the Mexica, not just for their grandeur, but for their fragility, for their humanity. Their empire was born from blood, and it was in blood that it met its end. But their story, like all stories of empire, is not one of simple tragedy. It is a reminder that the rise and fall of civilizations is not just a matter of military conquest or divine intervention. It is a matter of human ambition, of belief, and of the fragile nature of power. As the Mexica's empire grew, so did their demands. It was a civilization built on ambition and blood, a civilization that believed its destiny was not just to survive, but to dominate. Their gods had bestowed upon them a divine mandate to rule, and with this sacred duty came an unyielding desire to expand. With each conquest, they believed they were fulfilling their divine purpose, offering tribute to the gods. But as their reach stretched further, so did the cracks in their foundation. The Mexica's empire became a sprawling network of cities, each bound by the same religious beliefs, each serving as a tributary to the great capital. Yet within the empire, the burden of this power began to weigh heavily. The conquered peoples, once subdued by fear and awe, began to feel the weight of their oppression. They were forced to give tribute, to submit to the Mexica's rule, to surrender their own gods in favor of the Mexica's pantheon. The promise of divine favor, once a unifying force, now became a symbol of their suffering. The Mexica, for all their strength and brilliance, were blind to the growing unrest beneath their rule. The tributary cities, bound by blood and fear, began to grow weary of the endless sacrifices, the constant tribute, the brutality of Mexica conquest. But the Mexica, in their arrogance, failed to see the signs. They believed that their power was unassailable, that their gods would forever protect them. Their religious fervor became their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. They had built an empire that rested not on the stability of their rule, but on the constant cycle of war and sacrifice. This cycle, once sacred and necessary, had become a beast of its own. It was a force that could no longer be controlled. The gods they had once appeased were now silent, and the Mexica, in their blind devotion, continued to wage war, to expand, to conquer, without realizing that the foundation of their empire was crumbling. The blood that had once sustained them now became a burden, a weight they could no longer bear. The arrival of the Spanish in 1519, initially seen as a blessing, was the final blow to the Mexica. They welcomed the foreign invaders as gods, unaware that their own hubris had led them to the brink of destruction. The Spanish, led by Hernán Cortés, the jewel of the Aztec Empire, was brought to its knees. The once great city, built upon blood and devotion, was torn apart by the very forces the Mexica had sought to control. The great temple, the heart actions, their identity. The Mexica had believed they were invincible, that their gods had chosen them to rule. But in the end, it was their very faith that led them to their destruction. Their empire, built on blood and sacrifice, crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions. The gods they had worshipped had abandoned them, leaving them to face their fate. As the Spanish soldiers moved through the ruins of Tenochtitlan, they saw what remained of a once mighty civilization, its temples, its pyramids, its treasures, all reduced to rubble. But the Mexica's legacy was not entirely lost. In the ashes of their city, the Mexica's story lived on, a story of ambition, faith, and ultimately fragility. It is a story that echoes through history, a reminder that no matter how powerful, no matter how divine the ambition, all empires must fall. In the centuries that followed, the ruins of Tenochtitlan were buried beneath the streets of Mexico City, but the lessons of the Mexica remain. Their rise and fall is a testament to the dangers of hubris, to the fragility of power, and to the harsh truth that no civilization, no matter how great, can escape the inexorable forces of time. The Mexica believed they were chosen by the gods to rule the world, but in the end, their destiny was not theirs to command. It was a fate shaped by forces beyond their control, forces that brought them to the height of glory, only to watch them fall from that peak. And yet, as we reflect on the fall of the Mexica, we must also remember the grandeur of their civilization. They were a people who built cities that defied the imagination, who created art and culture that would leave an indelible mark on history. The Mexica were a people who reached for the heavens, who believed their destiny was written in the stars, but whose story, like all great civilizations, was one of inevitable decline. The gods they had once served in such reverence were now silent, and the empire they had built was but a shadow of its former self. In the end, the Mexica's empire is a reminder that all things, no matter how powerful or divine, must fall. The blood that once flowed in the service of the gods has long since dried, and the echoes of their once great civilization are now only whispers in the wind. But the Mexica, like all civilizations before and after them, live on in the lessons they leave behind, in the story of their rise, their glory, and their fall. The Mexica, who would come to be known as the Aztecs, were a people whose ambition and belief in their divine destiny shaped the very foundation of their empire. They did not view themselves merely as a kingdom, but as the very heart of the world, a civilization whose greatness was dictated by the gods themselves. From the moment they arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they envisioned a city that would transcend the physical world and become a symbol of divine order. This was not merely a place for them to settle, but a stage upon which the eternal and the mortal would meet. In their eyes, Tenochtitlan was the center of the universe, a holy city where heaven and earth converged. It was their destiny to rule not by force alone, but through the will of the gods, who had chosen them to bring order to the chaos of the world. Tenochtitlan itself, built upon the sacred waters of Lake Texcoco, was a reflection of this divine mandate. Its grandeur was unmatched, with towering pyramids, intricate causeways, and floating gardens that seemed to rise from the water like a dream. The Mexica believed that every stone, every structure in their city was infused with divine meaning. The great temple, the beating heart of the city, was not merely a place of worship, it was the very axis of the universe. And within it, the Mexica performed their most sacred rituals, offering blood to the gods to maintain the balance of the cosmos. For the Mexica, blood was not merely a sacrifice, it was a gift that connected them to the divine. In every drop of blood spilled upon the altar, the Mexica saw their connection to the gods reaffirmed, and in return, they believed the gods would provide them with the strength to conquer and to thrive. Yet, with all their might, the Mexica's ambition began to cast a shadow over their empire. The very strength that had driven them to greatness, conquest, expansion, and the relentless pursuit of power, also sowed the seeds of their downfall. They built an empire that rested upon a delicate balance, the tribute from their subjects, the constant flow of blood, and their unshakable belief in their divine destiny. But as the empire grew, so too did the demands placed upon their conquered peoples. The tribute required was not just material, it was spiritual. It was blood sacrifice. What had once been a source of strength now became their greatest weakness. Their reliance on the blood of their enemies, their dependence on the conquest of new lands to sustain their power, left them vulnerable. The tribute from their subjects became a chain, and the more they expanded, the harder it became to control the very empire they had built. It was an empire fueled by fear, by violence, and by the promise of divine favor. But it was an empire that had lost its humanity. This disconnect between the arrival of the Spanish in 1519, at first seen as an omen of divine favor, proved they were a fallen empire, a civilization swallowed by its own ambition. But it was not just the Mexica who suffered in the wake of their fall. The destruction of Tenochtitlan was the death of a worldview, a death of belief. It was a death of everything they had held sacred. The Mexica had lived their lives in reverence to their gods, believing that their destiny was written in the stars. And yet, in their final moments, they realized that their gods had turned away from them, that their belief in their invincibility had been a mirage, a fatal flaw. As we reflect on the fall of Tenochtitlan, we're reminded that the story of the Mexica is not just a story of their collapse, but a universal tale of the rise and fall of empires. They were the center of the universe, but in the end, they were like all empires, fragile, fleeting, and subject to the forces of time. Their empire, built on blood and sacrifice, fell as all empires do, by the weight of its own contradictions. The fall believed they were chosen by the gods to rule the earth, but in the end, it was not their divine mandate that determined their fate. It was the forces of history that brought them to their knees. And so, the legacy of the Mexica, like all great empires, is a story of rise and fall, of ambition and consequence. It is a story that continues to resonate, reminding us that no matter how grand the vision, no matter how sacred the mission, all things must eventually be tested by the winds of time, and all things must eventually fade away. In the end, the gods who once protected the Mexica remained silent, and the empire they had built on sacrifice and divine favor collapsed, as all empires inevitably do.